Hey guys, how you doing today? Today's video is going to be on a subject that I don't actually talk that much about. Uh, Today I'm going to be talking about religion, the Bible, slavery within the Bible. One of my Patreons, bless you for being a Patreon, thank you so much, caught on. I do mention from time to time that I'm an evangelical Christian, or I used to be an evangelical Christian. Let me be more clear on that. And that my evangelical Christianity I held on to until about my mid-20s. And that I no longer hold on to the evangelical Christianity, but I am still very interested in religion. I'm still very interested in religion as a concept or as a phenomenon in the society. But generally, I believe that we should be looking at religious documents and religious thought from a secular perspective, right? That we shouldn't look at the Bible any differently than the works of Shakespeare, right? We shouldn't look at the Bible any differently, honestly, than like Harry Potter, straight up. And I don't think that that is sacrilegious or evil to say. What I think is deeply unfortunate is this idea that we're supposed to believe that a document that has literal magic in it is supposed to be interpreted as if that magic actually happened, right? Like that, instead of taking an interpretive lens to it or a literary lens to it, we're supposed to take a literal lens to it and treat magic as if it's real, as if there is actually a wizard coming back at any moment, right? So please don't unsubscribe from me for this video. If you're not interested in the subject, or if you're not interested in getting into it with me, please, just bounce along. That's fine. Maybe leave a like if you'd like, or hey, leave a subscription. What the heck? I generally talk about politics. I try to stay to the politics of the day, but one of my Patreons asked me to do a video on religion, and I'm going to honor that because I honor what my Patreons want me to talk about. I've always said I will read anything and I will talk about any subject and comment on anything that Patreon puts forward on me. And so here I am doing exactly that. And if you would like to be involved in that process, please, I could use a Patreon, another Patreon. So, okay, here we go. Let's start specifically with the slavery aspect as it exists in the Bible, right? That in many cases, evangelical Christians and Catholics end up being apologists for slavery in the Bible. That there are many instances of slavery, and there's many instances, especially through the New Testament, where Christ says something, or one of his followers says something along the lines of, slaves, be good to your masters, masters, be good to your slaves, these sorts of things. And if you are reading the Bible as if it is a rule book, if you are reading the Bible as if it is a handwritten document from God himself in order for how people should live in the world, then of course you'll find these passages to be abhorrent, right? They seem to justify slavery. They seem to justify the permanence of a slave system and the inability of a society to move forward past slavery as an institution and as a method of interchange and communication within a society, right? That God says slavery should be attained or maintained, and so here it is. And that's not a outlandish thing to say, right? There have been outright Christian proponents. You can go take a look at a book. I highly recommend people read this book. It should be taught in schools, called Cotton is King. There are outright people who argued during the Civil War that slavery should be maintained because God wants it to be, right? And that this argument from the Bible is used, especially by white supremacists throughout the South and Christian fascists throughout America, to maintain slavery. And this all kind of comes because what has happened is that humans are humans, and they have their own internal biases, and they have their own internal ways of looking at the world, and they have their own tribal way of looking at the world. A lot of, I think, what's happening, especially with the evangelical fascists in the South at the moment, is that they have fallen into a place of deep tribalism where they feel so unsafe and they feel so unsettled that they're all agreeing with one another that the magic in the Bible is real, because that at least gives them a concrete alliance with each other, right? And that people who go along with this absurd notion are also their friends and their allies. And it's also a good way to convert desperate people into your position and to know that they are actually on your side. Once they actually start talking as if the magic in the Bible is real, then you know that they're much more trustworthy, right? So, I think that the most important thing to do when approaching religious texts is to secularize them, right? I feel like I've said that, but it's worth restating. Like, read the Bible as if it is like the works of Shakespeare, as if it is a historical document. Because once you actually start doing that, then you can start seeing how this is actually an evolutionary document. This is actually something that exists within the human story and human history that continues the sort of evolutionary growth of humanity, right? That humanity is in a constant state of change, and is a constant state of movement and growth. And that texts like the Bible exist as anchor points, as ways for us to look back on our own history and see where we have come from. And in this way, then you can see that the mentions of slavery throughout the Bible are not an argument to maintain slavery, right? Which comes again from this idea that God wrote the Bible by his own hand and all this sort of nonsense position. But rather that it is a series of statements on how a society has to deal with slavery, right? Like, these documents, the New Testament is written during the height of the Roman Empire, right? That the New Testament is written during the height of the Roman Empire, that there were servile wars. Like, you know the figure Spartacus, right? Like, Spartacus was the leader of a slave revolution that was crushed by the Roman Empire. And 10,000 men after that war were crucified from the major port, I believe it was the Agrippa Way, from the major port to the city of Rome. So that meant that as the Roman Empire was in the Gaulish empires, in the Celtic lands, capturing and kidnapping more people and sending them to Rome, it meant that these new slaves, while they were walking along the path to Rome, walked by 10,000 crosses where 10,000 men had been crucified, right? It's not an insignificant event. It's not an insignificant event, and it definitely happened. Like, what a horrifying empire to live in, right? And the purpose of the servile wars was for the slaves to seek freedom, right? It was, the entire idea was that the slaves were going to seek their own freedom, and they organized militarily to do it, and they were crushed, right? And because there were three of these, and because it was the third servile war, the Roman Empire basically stood up and said, no, this ends, and we're going to end it with this mass crucifixion. This symbol to the underclass, the slave class, that they can no longer organize along these lines. And so what do you do? What do you do as a society, right? You have slaves, okay? You have slaves. You can't get away from that. You have an empire that has shown that it is going to maintain slavery through brutal force and through an act that we would consider a complete atrocity. Like, imagine a society that crucified 10,000 people today, right? Imagine if that happened. What would you have to say about such a society, right? This is where the Bible is written, and this is where it comes from, right? And so you have figures like Christ, and you have figures like his followers, right? Who are confronted with the reality of slavery in their society, and are asking themselves, but also saying to their society, okay, what do we do about slavery? We can't organize along military lines, right? That's out of the question. That's over. That story's finished. And their conclusion, very simply, is, okay, well, if slavery is going to exist, because it is going to exist, right? We can't stop it from existing. Then the people who are involved in the process might as well be as kind to each other as they possibly can. That slaves be good to your masters, masters be good to your slaves. Is slavery the greatest system ever? No, obviously not. The people who were involved in the process of slavery were involved in this process of maintaining the servile wars, of creating an internal rebellion. Like, obviously they are not pro-slavery. And I actually think, like, it's kind of gross that modern day atheists pretend as though the Bible is justifying slavery, because that's essentially a secession to evangelical Christianity, right? One of the great flaws of the left, in my view, when it comes to approaching biblical texts or religious texts generally, is that they begin the process by ceding authority to the hypocrites and the fascists, right? They essentially say, oh, what the hypocrites and the fascists are saying must be accurate, so let's talk about this issue from that perspective, instead of doing something like I do, which is saying, no, evangelicals are nuts, right? That they are speaking specifically along propaganda lines in order, and Chris Hedges, who wrote a wonderful book called Christian Fascists, he straight out calls evangelicals heretics, because they are, right? That they use biblical texts in order to flout the actual teachings of Christ, right? Christ is a guy who said, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the primary commandment, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, and love the Lord your God with all your heart. And if you were to secularize that second statement, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, it wouldn't mean love a man in the clouds who's going to bestow you with wishes and kisses if you pray to him. It would mean love the environment that you live in, right? This to me is what I call the Great Misunderstanding, which is the nature of God, right? That that God is actually, like, especially modern day atheists, the new atheists especially, they really try to paint this picture that, oh, God is a man in the clouds, right? And all of this kind of stuff. Whereas if you actually read theological works and you actually go in, and people like Isaac Newton, right? Isaac Newton was one of the great theologians of our era, and it's very strange that we have an atheist community that really elevates Isaac Newton as a scientific figure, but completely ignores his theological works, right? Isaac Newton was one of the great theologians in Christian history and throughout the Enlightenment. And it's explicitly stated that when we're talking about God, we're talking about the totality of all things, right? The totality of all creation, that God is the creative force as well as the base energy on which we live. And this introduces a much more interesting question to me, which is, like, when I was growing up, the question was always like, does God exist, right? And it's such a dead-end question, does God exist, right? Like, because it only fosters this separation in how we look at God, that on the one side you can say, well, of course a man in the clouds doesn't exist. Whereas the Christians and the Muslims and the Buddhists and like the Taoists and everybody, the religious figures on the other side of the equation are like, well, yeah, obviously God exists. Here it is, right? Here it is. Like here it is, right? This is God. This is God, right? This is God. This is God. Right? That this is the religious position, that God exists as the base energy and is the creative force in all things. And that side of the conversation never enters the secular sphere and is not observed or paid attention to by atheists. And this question of does God exist within those confines only propagates and continues that separation and that fundamental misunderstanding of what we're even talking about, right? And so I've actually come to believe that a more important question, a question that I would love to see actually talked about and actually debated meaningfully, is not does God exist? Because it seems like a complete dead end, and one that gets lost in a semantic argument more often than not. But a more poignant question that I wish theologians would begin to ponder and put forward and question is the universe sentient? There's a question that I think we could talk about. There's a question that I think we should have some interesting conversation about. Is the universe sentient? Because the question itself accepts that we are living in a structure. There is a universal structure. There is a base energy by which all things spring from. Quantum physics, that's exactly where they're at right now. That quantum physics is interested in, and it is in this kind of state and is in this kind of position. Where it's saying, oh, there is a base energy from which all things spring, and once you get down to that level, it seems like the rules of physics no longer apply. And it's like, yeah, because the base energy is itself sentient. And I mean, I feel pretty strongly that has to be the case, because if we are to call ourselves sentient, right? If we are to call ourselves sentient, well, the thing that's gave us life and is propelling us forward and is the basis and the foundation of our existence, is that inert? Like, is that a non-entity? Is that a non-sentient force? And one thing, so okay, now we're gonna go down the rabbit hole, okay? Because I feel like I've answered the question, the slavery question, when it comes to the Bible, and that we shouldn't be looking at the Bible as a magical document written by the hand of God or any of that kind of stuff. Those sort of statements are said just like it's just salesmanship, right? It's just saying, like, this is an important document. It was written by God himself, right? It's just that kind of thing, right? Like it's not to be taken seriously, and it's not to be believed, certainly. But at the same time, the Bible is still, and I put the Bible alongside with like the Vedas, the Torah, certainly the Quran, absolutely the Quran, as important cultural and historical documents. Like, they were written, entire societies adhere to them and listen to them and pay attention to them. We should take them seriously. And to me, one of the great sins, if not the greatest sin of Christianity, was that they put a bookend on the Bible. That they tacked on Revelations and then said, that's the end. No more books. You're not allowed to add anything else to this. And on top of that, they excluded, while they did that, it was the third century during the Nicene Council, right? They excluded documents from the text. That the Bible became, it finished, it ended, right? And like the Gnostic texts were completely removed. And what that did is it stopped the evolution, and it stopped the growth of Christianity, and it also stopped the internal discussion publicly, right? That the internal discussion continues on, but it continues on within like shadowy councils of bishops and archbishops, and it's not really existent in the public sector, which is a shame, because there are wonderful theological tracts that come out from people like Thomas Aquinas, people like Sir Isaac Newton, right? Like these religious texts, in my view, should become part of the biblical tradition and should be attached to the Bible. Instead, though, they're separate, and you have to really dig, and you have to really find out and do a lot of research, and they become kind of obscure texts and obscure things that we talk about, instead of something that the public understands as a continuation of a religious tradition and a continuation of an unfolding moral document. And because of this calcification of the Bible, and because it's no longer evolving and growing as a living document, as it opens the doors for people to misunderstand it in the first place, right? That you have like the evangelical Christians who obviously are using it as a political document and don't actually care what it says inside because they don't actually do anything that the book says to do. And then also atheists who stand outside of it, pretending as though what the evangelical Christians are doing is normal, right? And so you have this whole conversation that, from the view of somebody who looks at these documents as secular documents that come out of a society for a purpose, and it looks very childish to me. It looks very like, what in the hell kind of conversation even is this? Okay, now we're going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, because I want to talk about why one of the things I really think about the nature of existence, right? That this, I mean, if you've made it to this point, right, you're going to listen to me talk about anything. Okay. So we accept that there is a base energy to our existence, right? That's a very quantum mechanical, like quantum physics way of looking at the world. That we accept that there is a base energy upon which we all stand, right? And I ask the question, is this energy sentient? I believe it is, right? And but what is the nature of this energy then? And I think one of the great misunderstandings of theologians in the past, as they have investigated this kind of phenomenon of existence and what we're doing here and what this all is that they begin from the position that God, or the universe if you prefer, or the base energy, or whatever name you want to give it. I don't care what name you give it. I'm going to refer to it as God. Please understand that when I say God, I'm saying like the universe, the base energy, the collection of all things, right? I'm not talking about a man in the sky who's trying to grant wishes to Midwestern housewives. So this base energy, this base energy, they say, is benevolent, right? That God is benevolent. Now, what they generally meant within that statement is that the existence of God is better than the non-existence of God. It is better that things exist than that they don't exist. But this question of God's benevolence then becomes, it opens up the door to what is called the problem of evil, right? That God, if God is benevolent and all-knowing, right, then why does he allow things like a Holocaust to occur? Why does he allow things like genocide to occur? Why, if an all-loving, all-knowing God exists, well, certainly such a being would attempt to prevent these things. And I've thought about that, and I think on that a lot. And the trouble with that line of thinking, and the trouble with the line of thinking that God is like a benevolent figure, right, as opposed to a figure, is that it creates, God is like just this kind of creator, right? We've all seen those cartoons where God is like baking humans or like baking something, right? And then there's like an oops or something, and God's just like, oh well, we'll just live with it, right? That God is like crafting things, like he's a carpenter who has an idea and then is like sets about to create it, and that's sort of the idea of how it begins. But I actually think it's much more absurd than that. I really think it's much more absurd than that. That, like, when you look at life, there is a universal phenomenon that all things follow on the moment of their birth, right? That anytime anything enters the world, they attempt to answer what I have come to term the base question, right? And that base question is not, what am I doing here? That base question is not, what is life about, right? Those are older questions. Those are questions for teenagers, right? The question that all living creatures attempt to answer the moment they enter this reality is, what am I capable of doing, right? You can see like a deer, right? A deer immediately gets born and then it tries to find its legs, right? It tries to make it happen. You can watch insects. I've done beekeeping, right? You can watch bees get born and then immediately set about and trying to figure out and observe other bees and try to figure out, well, what is it we're all doing? What am I capable of? Like, what are these wings? What can I do? What can I do? Right? So take that idea, right? That every creature, everything that we would consider a life form in the society begins its journey by asking itself, and not like asking itself, like, what can I do? But just going on that quest of discovery, seeking its limitations, seeking its environment, trying to discover what is it that I can do and what is it that I exist in, right? And so take that idea and then begin to think about the philosophers, right? The Greek philosophers and even modern philosophers, secular philosophers, ask this question, well, why is there something rather than nothing? And how did all of this begin? And the way that they end, because it can't be turtles all the way down, right? Like it's just this constant eternal kind of thing. It has to be that there is a base energy that at one moment was inert and then at the next moment was no longer inert, right? That there was what's called in philosophy as well as in theological circles the first mover, right? That this energy must have been in a state of nothingness, and a nothingness so pure that we as humans can't even comprehend or understand what that means, right? But it must have been in this state and then moved into a state of movement, of going from literal non-sentience into sentience, and that there is this sort of tipping point that must have occurred. We don't have a better way of articulating or thinking about that at the moment. And the kind of old theological way of thinking about this is that, oh, well, yes, then God springs into being and all things get created and crafted and dropped in as if it's like this beautiful mosaic that is specifically created. And I think this gives a lot more onus, it gives a lot of credit to this creative force, right? Because I actually think much more simply than this. Imagine if you were a creature that goes from not existing to existing, as we all have done. That's not an extravagant thing to say. We have all gone from a period where we did not exist to a period where we did exist. But instead of that being limited to a singular form, like a human that has just 10 fingers or any of that kind of stuff, we're talking about a being that is capable of creating all things that are logically possible to be created, right? Like, that's the vastness of the scale that we are talking about, that a being moves from not existing to existing, and that being is the creative force in the universe and answers the question, well, what am I capable of doing? And if you are a being that is capable of creating all things that are logically possible to be created, then you do so, and you don't even think about it, right? That for a being with the vast scale and power of God, or the universe if you prefer, that the creation of all things happens almost as a byproduct of your very existence. And it's only after all of that is created, it's only after all of these possibilities and all of these universes and all of these multiple universes and different ways of existing are created, that such a being could even go and say, well, what is this good? What is this evil that these beings who are of my creation, who are of me, and who are a part of me and who are of me, what is this good that they are talking about? What is this evil that they are talking about? And the only way that such a being would ever, the only way a being such as this would even be able to learn about itself, or to learn about, to learn about itself, would be to observe its creation. And really, when you actually pause to think about it, this observation of creation is this being going through the life of its created, of its creations, right? Well, this is very, like, you think, the Christians always say, like, well, Christ is God, right? And what the Gnostics were doing, and why it's such a shame that they were cut out, is that they were beginning to extend this. They were saying, well, wait a minute, if Christ is God, then why is Bob down the street not God, right? Then why am I not God? Why am I not part of that? And once you pause and actually think about it, you are part of the creative energy. You exist as a byproduct of creation, and you are a piece of this larger whole, which is the body of God, the body of the creative force, or the universe, if you prefer. Carl Sagan articulated this secularly, right? We are all stardust, in this absolutely wonderful write-up that he made, that we are a byproduct of an exploding star, which is an absolutely beautiful sentiment, which aligns perfectly with what I'm saying here. And that it is only after all things that are possible to be created are created that we can go through and actually say, well, this is good and this is bad. Now, this comes with, like, a great deal of horror, if you ask me. There's this is where things get into, like, a strange and dark place, right? Because the creative force, the force that is God, creates all things that are possible to be created as a byproduct of its existence, okay? Well, so let's say that there is a moment, let's just say something like the Holocaust, right? There is a moment where God goes, this is horrific, this is too much to bear. Humanity should never experience this. No living creature should experience this. Well, how would such a being deal with that, okay? God can't simply just go, like, and rub the Holocaust out, right? Because his experience of the Holocaust relies on the Holocaust existing. And that if he were to scrub the Holocaust out, he would also need to scrub it out of his own memory, right? Because it exists within the energy of God, and that simply knowing about it, or simply knowing about it, or thinking about it, or having it exist within its memory means that it exists, right? That it is created, that it happens. And so if he attempted to scrub it out, then he would forget about it, and then look at the space where there is something that does not exist, and then simply, because he is the creative force, or it is the creative force, I shouldn't use the he, I really should say it, and because it is the creative force, it will just recreate it, and then re-experience it, right? And that this will put it in this sort of infinite, eliminate that. That truly the only way that a being such as God could eliminate stuff like genocides and holocausts and things like that from reality would be to experience them, and then attempt to reconfigure itself as time progresses downwards. That it would eliminate genocides and eliminate holocausts from itself as it grows through time, or as it moves through time, and it would do that by having the beings it creates and exists within communicate with one another, right? And say, that sucks, we should stop it. How does that happen? Let's not do that anymore, right? And that we can't prevent what happens in the past. We can't prevent the atrocities of the past. We can only prevent them in the future. And we can only learn from those situations. We can only learn from those existent forces. I don't even want to say errors, because we have, like, a baby will always fall over while it's learning to stand up and run, right? And you can't make that not the case. you can't make that not the case. And so this adds in this really huge element of horror, if you ask me, because these sorts of phenomenon, these sorts of things, not only exist, but they have to exist. And this puts us as humans in a position where it is absolutely, completely possible that there are going to be horrific horror shows that exist in our plane of reality, because they have to exist somewhere, right? That we exist within the multiverse theory, right? There's this multiplicity thing that occurs in quantum mechanics. Like Rick and Morty talk about this ad nauseum, that there is not only your reality, there's a reality that is identical to the one that you live in, where the differences between those two are so infinitely small that they are almost immeasurable, right? That there is a universe that exists parallel to this one, where the only difference between them is that when I say this phrase, there are 4 numbers instead of 5. I just inverted those numbers. So the other parallel universe said there are 5 numbers instead of 4. It inverted it. And then we move along, and that's the only difference, right? That anytime there is a choice or some kind of deviation possible, it exists and it is possible, and there is an entire universe that exists in order to support that small deviation and small change. And then eventually, as you go through these parallel universes, there is a deviation, a small deviation that occurs, but it occurs enough to be able to shift the entire narrative of the people in the society in a specific direction, right? Or change how things went in a way that is more perceptible, right? And more perceptible to humans, which is very important. But this arrangement, this existence of this force that exists in the universe, or that we exist by in the universe, makes it so that there are things that exist well outside our possibility, or well outside our own imagination, that do exist, and they are not pleasurable things, right? That this is the thing that we find horrible. Oh, so like a little party just broke out right where I was doing my recording. So, so I'm just gonna continue walking and talking with this one. If you've made it to this point, you guys, for real, like, you've got to subscribe. You got to get in on board with this kind of stuff. I don't typically talk about this issue. I don't typically talk about the nature of reality and our observation of it. And I think now is a good time to kind of circle back around on the primary kind of thesis of what our Patreon was talking about, right? Which, in my view, really does come down to, how are we observing these documents, right? How are we observing these documents? Are we observing these documents as an unfolding learning experience from not only humanity's perspective, but the perspective of a being that is itself in a process of discovering itself and discovering its own existence, right? Or are we attempting to create kind of a dead document that we look at and pretend was written by a all-powerful kind of super being, right? And like that this is the thing that distinguishes it, that if you believe that the Bible is this magic text that is supposed to be completely followed to the letter as much as possible, then of course you're going to use it as a document to claim a pro-slavery position, right? Of course, you have to, because the writers of the New Testament were existing during a period of slavery and attempting to deal with slavery. And as long as you decontextualize it from that and pretend as though the Bible is this perfect document that covers all things in a perfect way, then you have to argue that the Bible is a document that is pro-slavery. But if you treat the Bible as it is, which is a document written by men, by humans, in order to try to communicate with one another, to talk about issues with one another, as we do now, right? That it is a document of its day and of its time, then you can actually learn a great deal from it. That is actually a fascinating document that exists within the evolutionarily unfolding growth of this superstructure we live in, right? And that the superstructure itself, as we are going through it, is learning from itself. That I am speaking with the voice of God, as are you, right? I'm not unique. I'm not claiming uniqueness. I'm claiming that we are all resting, our feet all rest in the body of God and in the energy of God, and that we are God attempting to discover itself. People get lost in this whole like, oh, we need a quest for meaning or any of this kind of stuff. And generally I find that when people say, oh, we've got to go on this quest for meaning, what they really, really mean is, oh, you need to be happy with the work that you do, right? And while there's a nugget of truth in that, yeah, it would be nice to be happy with the work that you do. In my view, it's almost completely superfluous, right? This quest for meaning, because your existence, your very existence in this reality is meaningful, right? Your very existence in this reality is meaningful because you were created by God. You are a part of God. You are a part of the mosaic that makes the universe. And God wants you to be where you are right now. This is the big one that we don't ever talk about in our society. That the creative energy that exists and has put you where you are wants you to be there, right? So much of right-wing rhetoric and evangelical rhetoric really focuses on this sort of superpowered individualism, right? That you as an individual should be able to stand up straight with your shoulders back and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get stuff done. And this completely denies that there is a force, there is a creative force that exists that has far more to do with your conditions than anything else that's around you. And the only way that you can change these conditions is by communicating with the other beings around you that are capable of articulating abstract thought and forming plans and formulating societies and building reality, right? The way that humans are capable of doing. And to communicate with them and have everyone agree all at once that, oh yeah, no, we should live in better conditions, or we should change our conditions. And if you are in a society that agrees that humans are capable of collectively changing our arrangement, we are capable of collectively moving forward and changing what we do as a group, because we are all part of this larger system, then chances are good you'll get that done. But if you're standing around saying, no, it's up to you, you as an individual need to individualize that individualism, right? Then nothing's ever going to get done, right? Nothing's ever going to actually happen, because if you just believe that it's about being an individual in a confusing, complicated world, then of course you're gonna calcify, and your society is going to fight against itself, right? Because the desires of the individual, especially in a society like capitalism that's structured on selfishness, that's structured in a selfish way, is going to eat itself, right? And instead of us acknowledging that we are all part of a larger system and we need to pay attention to that system as well as the other beings within it, right? Instead of loving our neighbor like ourselves and loving our environment with all our heart, we're supposed to pay attention to just us. we're just supposed to live our lives in this simplistic, simple way that comes naturally, right? This is part of the difficulty of being a human in reality, is that you only have your own perspective, right? You can only see out of your own eyes. You can only feel with your own skin and your own heart, right? You exist within this shell, and you don't actually think that there is anything that goes beyond that, right? That there's any extension to that. But of course we know that there is an extension to it. Like, of course we know that there's an extension to it. Your heart sends out an electromagnetic field, right? That is perceptible and measurable. You can see it. So you exist outside of yourself. But even more than that, other people are putting forward those fields, right? And you can actually sense those fields. Now we're getting really hooba-jooba, and I don't deny that that's what we're doing. But these sorts of phenomenon, right? If you live in a society that's just filled with people who are hard-nosed secularists, or hard-nosed evangelicals, right? Who are just like, oh, the text. This idea that you can sense the energy of other people can sound outlandish. But I mean, I've worked in theater, I've worked in music, right? And every theatrical artist and musician will tell you, no, there's an exchange of energy that occurs, right? There is a sharp difference between performing in a rehearsal space in front of nobody and performing in front of people. And it's because of this energy exchange that naturally exists within people. And that because we have this ability, we can pick up on each other's moods and emotions, right? You ever walk into a room, right, where people are having a fight? You can really pick up the vibe, eh? Like there's an odd energy about it, right? If you walk into a space where people are grieving during a funeral, or if you walk into a space where people are joyously celebrating the birth of a child, there's just going to be a different energy, and you're going to know it. But we don't ever talk about these things. We don't ever actually train anyone to pay attention to these things, right? We don't actually acknowledge the phenomenon. We tend to think that we are just brains moving around in a meat sack, when I think the opposite is actually true, that it is our bodies that are the ones that are taking in the energy and taking in all of this, and that our brain operates more reactively than that. That we are more enslaved to our emotions than we like to admit. And it's through the study and the training of our emotional state and working with our emotions that we grow as people, instead of just living in our head, which is typically what we do. Anyway, that's a bit of a deviation from what I'm talking about. So, you guys can tell, I can just go on this subject. I can just go on this subject. I know way more about it than I think a person should. And I do want to keep relating it back to my Patreon's initial kind of statement, right? That the Bible does prop up this argument for slavery, which, again, if you're going to argue from an evangelical position, yes, it has to, right? You believe the Bible is a magical document, and that it was written by God directly, right? And if you believe that, yeah, of course, you have to argue that it is a pro-slavery document, and it has been used as a pro-slavery document by slavers. You can go read Cotton is King, right? Let's hit back on that. Go read Cotton is King. You're going to see that that's the truth. And it behooves us as people to stop that, right? To stop that. Like, why would we ever just limit ourselves to a single document? Why would we ever just limit ourselves to this singular document when we are studying the evolution and the expansion of humanity, right? And religious texts are part of this. Religious texts are part of the evolution and growth of humanity, without a doubt, right? They're important documents. that have shaped entire cultures and have shaped entire people. And they're not infallible, obviously. Like they're obviously filled with the biases of the author. They're obviously filled with the biases of the societies that they are written in, right? Those are just obvious truths, but you can see through these documents an unfolding evolution, an unfolding growth of not only individual humans, but of individual societies, and then, if you take the widest view possible, a growth of the superstructure that we live in on a day-to-day basis, right? The universal energy that I have called God in this particular video. And that is a beautiful thing. And I think this has just been like the most long-form way of me saying, don't get mired. Don't allow these evangelicals to define these texts. Don't allow evangelicals to be the sole proprietors. Don't cede this ground to them. Don't allow them to have control over the interpretation of the Bible, right? Because we all agree that they're wrong, right? So why should we cede this ground? Why should we allow them to continue forward with these documents unchallenged, right? And because if we allow them to continue forward unchallenged, then they get to keep making the same stupid arguments about slavery, and they get to keep pretending like Christ and the disciples were pro-slavery, when in reality, they were not. They were just existing with slavery that they couldn't escape, that they couldn't get away from, and while simultaneously attempting to create a more equitable society, right? One that is more beneficial. And yeah, I could keep talking at length, and honestly, please keep asking me questions on this subject. I don't mind talking about it. I do think that religion and religious expression and communication is important. It plays an important part of the existence of humanity, but oftentimes it gets politicized along tribal lines, right? That's the danger of religion, and why certain cultures and certain ideologies, including communism, right? Including communism, have attempted in the past to de-religify their societies, have attempted to purge religion from their societies. I actually think that is a natural response. It's happened a lot through human history, where a political group has come through and attempted to purge a religion from their society. And you can successfully purge a religion from your society, but you can't purge the religious impulse. You can't purge the constant desire to attempt to express our existential selves and our existential existence. And you can pretend like that's not religious if you like, but to me, that's just creating semantics, right? That's just saying like, no, it's not religion, it's philosophy. No, it's not God, it's the universe. No, it's not X, it's Y. It's just creating a new language to supplant the language that you don't like, to express the same subjects and the same thoughts that have typically been expressed in the past. And in many ways, it's just like a reinvention of the wheel, right? That no, we don't say God, we say universe. And so we have to make all of the discoveries about the universe that people in the past have already made about God, and you can't use theological documents from people like Thomas Aquinas or Isaac Newton. You have to rediscover these things and re-articulate them over and over and over again, right? And it's this sort of abusive cycle that humanity inflicts upon itself because it can't get over the politicization and the tribalization of religion, right? Because we are political and tribal beings. And fundamentally, we have to get over this this tribalization of the way that we look at the world, because we aren't tribes. We aren't separated by these sort of illusionary kind of creations, right? Like we try to find these extremely small differences, right? Skin color, right? Language. These small differences that exist within humans based on geographical lines, but in the end, when compared to the vastness and the scale of the universe, or of God, if you prefer, are completely superficial, and we can overcome them, right? That they don't exist in permanent ways. They aren't actually things that divide and separate us permanently, but that we use them as ways to divide ourselves and separate ourselves into tribes, pretending as though we are not all part of the one body that is God or the universe, right? And we exclude some religious texts from our learning, from our understanding, while elevating other religious texts to a mystical quality that they don't deserve or shouldn't have. And this is an incredibly common thing to do, and the unfortunate end point of it is that it means that once you exclude others and elevate your own based on tribal or political reasoning, it allows you to, or it forces you rather, to act as apologists for cultures that existed 2,000 years ago that were dealing with conflicts and things that were existence in their own time, and it forces you to act as an apologist for those things on a universal level. It forces you to universalize things that are not to be universalized, or contextual or decontextualize things that require their own context to exist. And it's a real shame, because there's a richness in the Christian tradition. There's a richness in the Islamic tradition. There's a richness in the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Zoroastrian tradition, the Confucius, the Taoist, right? That all of these religions and all of these modes of attempting to articulate what it is to be alive and a human in the world are each valid in their own right, and each part of the larger picture. There's this great story that three blind men were attempting to explain an elephant, but each one could only grab one part of the elephant. And so one grabbed the trunk, and one grabbed the ear, and one grabbed the tail, right? And one said, an elephant is this long, skinny thing. The other goes, no, an elephant is this really thin, flat thing. And the other one goes, no, it's this little tiny hairy thing. And of course, because they could only speak from their one tiny position, they couldn't see the whole of the creature, right? And because they couldn't see the whole of the creature, they somewhat missed the forest for the trees. And then if you want to take it to the next level about what we're doing, now imagine that concept gets tribalized and politicized, right? That the guy who is feeling the trunk goes, no, this is the one true elephant. And the guy that's holding the tail goes, no, this is the one true elephant. Okay, guys, this is the end of my video here, okay? I love you all. You're all doing really, really great out there, okay? Don't let people gaslight you. Don't fall down like little rabbit holes. There are ways to connect with one another, but we need to get over our tribal selves, and we need to get over our politicized selves, our small-scale way of thinking, because we exist in a much larger scale than this. We exist in a giant, unfolding, constantly evolving story that is always subject to change, and the way that we change it is by using our voices that were given to us by God to speak to other creations that have been created by God, and speaking to them as equals in order to create a new foundation for us to stand on. That is how change happens. It's not God coming down with a magic wand and going, "Ding." We speak with the voice of God to other gods. And that is how I view the world. I view every person I speak to as a part of God, as an avatar of God, as I am an avatar of God. And that is how we grow our society. And it's the people who forget this, who believe that they supersede other people, or that there are such a thing as an inferior person. That's when we get into trouble. Okay, please, if you've made it to this point, you have to subscribe, right? I think that that's true. Everyone can agree you have to subscribe. You just listened to me talk about this for about an hour. Please, please, please like the video. Please share it around. Please, Patreon, right? This was for a Patreon, and if you want to hear me talk about any subject you like, please, Patreon, and then just let me know. I will definitely do it. Don't let people gaslight you. Don't let people gaslight you. People will gaslight you about all sorts of things. People will gaslight you about massive scale stuff. Of course, they're going to gaslight you about how wonderful you are and how good you're doing in the world, okay? Good luck. We're going to need it.